It's a little bit interesting. Each time that I do one of these, I pause for just a minute to make sure that I don't get started before everything's ready. And while I'm doing that, I'm looking at myself in the camera. And it's an interesting view. If you knew the changes that have occurred in my appearance through the years, you'd be amazed. People don't even recognize me from my youth. And one of these days I'll get a picture of what I looked like when I was 15 or 10 or 12 or whatever that I talk about in these videos, clips that I post to YouTube. But it's been quite a ride, and my appearance has changed considerably, and of course I look older. And I've noticed that when I'm away from people, even people that I know, most of them, some of them age better than others, I guess I'd say, but within a 2 or 3 year time period, if you're away from somebody, that's you start to notice the changes when you come back into contact with them. And I think, that's all part of the plan. We talk about the transcendentalists getting their information from nature. Nature is that way. You ever watched a dandelion when it gets started in the spring? It's just starts as a little plant, and pretty soon it's grown. It throws out this beautiful yellow flower. Then it gets taller, and the flower turns to seeds, and it blows away in the wind. And that's kind of the way I feel sometimes, like I might be just about to that stage when I'm going to blow away in the wind. But I mentioned in one of the videos, I like to think of myself as having the capability to kick the dust when I die. And so I'm making a last effort with these videos to kick the dust, and hope somebody, whenever they get around to watching these, if they do, will recognize that I made an effort to make a difference, I guess, is the way I'd say it, to make an effort to make a difference. And I did it even before I blew away in the wind. So, or died, which some days I wonder, I don't know how long I've got to live. I mentioned last time my dad telling me that, bringing me out into the kitchen and telling me that before my wife and I went back to school, that the Lord is bound when we do what he says, and when he's not, there is no promise, and how urgent he was for me to know that. And there's a sense of urgency about what I'm doing with all this. I feel it. It's a little unnerving because I don't know why I feel it. Is it like, okay, I'm going to kick the dust and you better get it done before you do, or what? So it's just me rambling on with my mind, but I need to do that a little bit too. Sometimes if I'm going to ramble with my mouth, I might as well ramble with my mind. I've been doing it all my life. So anyway, so I called the last clip, I, the Lord, am bound. And to try to put that all into the context of this whole transcendental, movement that I kind of took a liking to, at least the definition for it, and that's that we have the innate power to know truth intuitively. I believe that. Now, don't confuse that with the fact that, or don't confuse that to thinking that Emerson and Thoreau and some of the other transcendentalists, I buy into everything they say, and everything they did is perfect in my view, because it wasn't. And But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that fundamental statement that we all have the intuitive ability to know truth intuitively. And that's an important thing, to know truth. It's like I talked about the little babies learning to walk. I mean, if they went to all that effort to stand up and take those initial steps, and it worked fine one time, but the next time the ground fell right up from under them. I mean, think what that would do to them. That would just devastate them, and they wouldn't be able to trust anything. So trust is important, whether it's your father, like I mentioned last time, like your father being able to trust you to plant a 9-acre patch of barley, or do what the Lord tells you to do so that you can bind the Lord. If you think about that statement, bind the Lord, really, that's a pretty powerful statement. And yet, if you think about it, it's tying into truth. The Lord is tied to truth as well. And my dad knew that. And if I heeded the Lord's commandments, here we go again. If I heed the Lord's commandments when they come to me, he'll be bound. And I'll have a promise. And so will you. So anyway, I've been thinking a little bit about how I might springboard off of that planting the grain experience to another statement that comes out of the transcendental. I think this one was Emerson's statement, but he said this, and he's considered kind of the father of all of this because of some of the essays that he wrote, particularly the essay called Nature, because that's where they went for answers. And one of the things that he said was, because they always encourage independent thinking, to know truth intuitively of yourself. One of the things he said was this. He said, a foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds. Underline, foolish, because that's the critical part. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because you do something different, you're going to get something that you didn't deserve, that wasn't truthful, that God wasn't bound to. A foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds. Has that critical word in it, foolish. And I ought to explain, I guess, a little bit what I know about hobgoblins, because that might be a new term for some of you that are watching this. But from what I can gather, it come out of the Old English periods, the 1500s, 1500s. And they were little creatures, or creatures that were around the house that they were all right sometimes, but other times they just cause a lot of mischief. And I think it was one of Shakespeare's plays. I think it was, if I remember right, it was like A Midsummer Night's Dream. There was a character in there called Puck, P-U-C-K, and he's been described by many as being a hobgoblin. He was just there, but you couldn't really figure out for sure why. And he messed a lot of things up. And even though he did a few good things, you couldn't rely on him. And so that's what a hobgoblin is. Hobgoblin of little minds means that you might buy into it, but you're going to get sandwiched somewhere in the whole mess if you're not careful. So, foolish consistencies. And I've thought a little bit about that grain planting thing that I did. My dad told me so many different things to watch for about getting the strings in the grain and clogging up the gears and making sure that when I went over a rock that the spout, the little tubes that fed into the grain spouts where they went into the ground didn't bounce out, and just sprinkle it on the top of the ground instead of going inside and underneath where it could get some moisture and grow. How to drive straight, how to do the corners, how to fill the bins, how to make sure the seed was all there and the compartments didn't run dry and think you were drilling when you weren't, and just a whole bunch of things that he went through, that little 11, 12-year-old mind of mine, and I just did everything I could to follow him. What I didn't do was think, I'm not very experienced at this. In fact, I've never done it before, but he's an old man and I'm a young kid and I got a vibrant mind and I'll just do it my way. That is an example of what I'm talking about when I say don't place, that when you talk about the foolish consistency, that make sure it's foolish consistency. Because consistency, in that case, had come about through a whole ton of experience by my dad. He knew. He'd been there and done it over and over again. He knew if there were going to be problems, exactly where they'd show up. And he told me about it. And he was trying to say the same thing when he had me in the kitchen that morning or that afternoon. And he said, I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say, and when you do not what I say, you have no promise. He was trying to let me know how to drill life, if you want to say it that way, because he had experience with it. And he's a good dad. I valued him for his independent thinking. I've always thought he was an independent thinker. He evaluated things when he said them, and he didn't necessarily fall into the trap of doing everything just out of conformity. It wasn't a foolish consistency. Some of it he learned the hard way, and other things I'm sure he applied what somebody had taught him, but it wasn't a foolish consistency, and he passed that on to me, and I think he was trying to tell me how to drill life. So it's kind of a nice thought when I think about it. So you may have heard about the girl who was trying to teach her daughter how to, the wife, I guess, woman, mother who was trying to teach her daughter how to cook roast. I think it was at Christmas time. I guess it didn't matter when, but she said, the first thing you do is cut the ends off the roast before you put it in the pan. And anyway, and the daughter says, well, why? Why do you cut the ends off the roast? And her mother said, it's just what you do. You cut the ends off of the roast before you cook it. And it's just best that way. And she says, well, Mom, why? Why do you cut the ends off the roast? Well, her mother couldn't really tell her, but she says, it's what you do. It's the way my mom taught me, is that you cut the ends off the roast before you cook it. And so they talked for a bit and decided the best thing to do would be to call Grandma. And so she called her mother and her little girl's grandmother and asked Grandma. And Grandma said, well, I don't know, for sure. But that's the way my mother taught me, was you cut the ends off the roast. Well, it just so happened the great-grandma was alive. So long story short, they called great-grandma and said, okay, so we're having this dilemma about why you cut the ends off the roast before you cook it. What you taught us that. Why do you do that? And she said, oh, the pan I had was always too little, and I had to cut the ends off or it wouldn't fit in the pan. And anyway, that tradition got handed down through generations, and until somebody asked the why question. Well, the point of all that is we need to ask the why question. I ask it myself. There's a lot of things that I do that are still kind of foolishly consistent, and I'm breaking away from a lot of them. Some of you say, well, you're wearing the same cap every time you do one of these so far, yet you're preaching about being a foolish consistency. Well, I haven't got time right now to tell you why I'm wearing this cap, but if I did, you'd see that there was rationale behind it. It's not just because I haven't thought it through, or there's not a reason. I won't tell you that right now, because we don't have time for such nonsense. But this foolish consistency thing is all around us, everywhere. This consistency, and a lot of it is foolish, and there's a whole lot of it that is not foolish at all and beneficial. My dad teaching me how to plant grain in the manner that he did, with the moisture and everything just right, and there was nothing foolish about that. That was based on truth. But I thought, hold on, here at Christmas time, we celebrate Christmas with Christmas trees. That's kind of the season that I'm in right now, a little bit before Christmas. And I can remember years and years ago, after I started reading and studying some of this stuff, and thought, heck, let's just chuck the Christmas tree and bring in a sagebrush. Well, you can imagine how my wife responded to that, because sagebrush have their own set of problems. But it's just kind of me being silly with her. But something happened to me when I thought about Christmas trees and the consistency of doing that, because from that time forward, I started to figure out a little bit what the symbolism in a Christmas tree was at Christmas time. And I read all kinds of things about it. And there's some, again, I don't have time to go through all that right now, but particularly the lights. The lights on the Christmas tree. Just it's in the darkest time of winter. It's when we need light the most, and those lights just make my days at Christmas time and through those darkest parts of winter. And I haven't developed my relationship with all of you enough for you to know why I would be so focused on the lights. And it's not just the lights, it's the source of the power for those lights that I focus on. And it's the marvel of what that tree was, and how it grew, and what it gave up to make me happy. Well, some of you that know me might already be thinking, oh, now I am starting to see maybe what you're talking about. Well, I'm not going to get into it, but yeah, there is a reason. Now, when I look at a Christmas tree, it's not just a Christmas tree. It's filled with so much symbolism that restores me during the darkest parts of my winter. look at Christmas trees a little differently from now on, and you'll get some benefit out of it that I got years and years ago when I stopped just being foolishly consistent. There's another time in my life when I hung out with there was a family of boys in our neighborhood, and we lived in a farming community. But these boys were mostly all older than I was. And I don't know why it was. I ended up working with them a little bit, and then we did some fooling around after work. But for one summer, and it seemed to be just the one summer, but for one summer I spent quite a bit of time with them. And it was an interesting experience. What I noticed right off was that their language was a whole lot different than the kind of words I was used to hearing. I didn't hear those kind of words from my dad or my mom or my brothers, or even my friends didn't use those kind of words. And I'm not going to sit here and say all the bad words I heard that summer, but they were pretty bad. And they kind of went cross-grained to me to begin with, because anyway, I was alarmed, and it didn't feel good, and it upset me, and I thought, I don't want to be around that. I like my old family life where we just use normal words. And anyway, as I went through the summer, we crossed paths several times, or I did, with these boys. And what I noticed that during the course of the summer, with all of the playing and the working we did, and me listening to those words, they started to sound a lot more normal. There was a consistency to them all summer. And by the end of the summer, you guessed it, I was using some of those same words that I, first of all, just was so disgusted with. I thought of them as being sinful. And I remembered a poem at the end of the summer. I don't know that I could say I remembered it. I read it, and then I've since kind of honed in on it, but if I can remember it, it went something like this. Sin is a monster. Bad words. Sin is a monster of so frightful mean as to be hated needs to be seen. Yet seen too oft, familiar with her face, we first abhor. Just like I did with those first words I heard. We first abhor, and then endure, and then embrace. I had gone through those steps during that one summer. I abhorred, then I endured, then I embraced. And what I was doing is being transformed by a consistency of somebody else's. I wanted to imitate for some reason. There must have been some things about those boys that I wanted to imitate. And I didn't draw the line at some sinful language. That was what I termed as sinful language. Well, there's other things in my life that have been kind of like that. I can remember in ninth grade when where I went to school, we finished 8th grade, and then you went to high school. So we had an elementary grade that went 1 through 8. We didn't have kindergarten back then, but we went 1 through 8 in grade school, and then 9 through 12 in high school. And I can remember the first day at high school, my mother, let me back up just a little bit. My mother used to pick raspberries up in Garden City, and where there was a lot of raspberry fields, and they needed pickers. And she didn't have a full-time job, but at the same time, she liked her kids to be dressed for school nice. And that was about the only way she could get a little extra cash. And so she got up early, 4 o'clock in the morning, and she'd drive up there in the dark get there at the daylight and start picking raspberries for a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And she bought me some school clothes, I remember. I didn't have a job, so I didn't have money of my own to speak of, but they weren't. I did a lot of helping on the farm, and they helped me out with school clothes. Well, I can remember walking down this sidewalk to the front to the front doors of the high school. Out on the front steps, there were these older boys. Some of them were the ones that I'd learned the bad words from, and then there were some others that I knew of, but I didn't know them personally. I just kind of looked up to them because they were athletic, and they, they were the basketball players and the football players, and they drove cars. Even some of them had cars of their own, and I kind of admired them. And they were standing, all of them. There must have been 6 or 8 of them on the kind of the front steps. It wasn't right on the steps, but off to the side. There's some landings, and it's like they were the greeters at school that year. And guess what? They all wore green T-shirts. They all had black, we'd call them fairy shoes today, black pointed shoes with white socks and black stretch pants that would just fit so tight to your legs you wonder how your legs could get circulation. Anyway, that was the way they were all dressed, all 8 of them, and kind of a certain color green T-shirt, olive green, maybe a little darker color than that, but and then these black pants and white socks and pointed black shoes. And I can remember going home and thinking all the way home that I'm not going to fit in. I'm not going to fit in up there at that school unless I get some black stretch pants, some white socks, some pointed shoes, and some green T-shirts. And it kind of haunted me because I just couldn't see any other way to fit in. And so I saved up a little of my own money, rounded up somewhere, begged it, borrowed it, whatever. I can't remember where I got it all. But I got enough to give me one of those outfits. And it was kind of interesting because I was a little younger, but I was trying to fit in with the older boys, and I needed those clothes. And anyway, I won't go on with the story because it'd take a while to tell, but there's an example of what I would consider now, and did consider not too long after that, a foolish consistency. We do it all the time still, though, don't we? That's how the apparel industry thrives, is by convincing you that what you were wearing yesterday is no longer in style. Today, as I speak, denim pants, we used to just call them all Levi's, but denim pants. Today, as I speak, they're not really fashionable to a lot of people unless they're riddled, almost ready to fall apart, frayed all over in the front. You can see your skin through the pants. Well, back in my day, that's the exact same thing we tried to avoid all summer when we was working, is to wear our pants out hauling hay, because it was easy to do if you didn't. In fact, we would wear chaps over our Levi's because we didn't want them to fray out. We wanted them to stay and protect our legs, and if we ever got a hole in our knees or something like that, not so much in high school, but when I was in grade school, it was nothing to see people coming to school with patches on their knees where there was a hole. They didn't have money to just go buy a new pair. So it's kind of interesting how the fashion industry taps into this belief that we have, that we've got to follow everybody else. We've got to think like they think. Well, it's interesting for me to talk about some of those things, and yet I recognize it still in myself. And you'll notice that the quote that I gave from my dad about, "I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. When you do not what I say, you have no promise." He quoted that from Scripture. Well, I won't tell you where it all started, but at least not right now. But I started to think that, hold on, all this stuff of going to church and Sunday school and saying prayers and all these things that we do in the name of religion, why am I doing that? Am I doing it just so that I can fit in? Or is there a purpose, or is there a reason to it? Maybe you thought the same thing. Well, a good share of what I'm going to have to say in these podcasts and these YouTube posts will deal with that, because I've come to grips with it. And let me tell you where I got started. I got started the same place that my dad did. I felt like my dad loved me and was concerned about me enough to set me on the right track to get that drilling job done with that barley so that it would come up and look as good as it did. And I was so proud of it, and it gave me a good feeling. And I was convinced that I owed it. Maybe I could say it that way. I felt like I owed it to my father, who took care of my understanding in lots of ways and made me successful in lots of ways, to explore what he had come to know as the truth in his religion. And it was it's been a meaningful, lifelong journey that's still going on. But oh my, have things fallen together. There's so many pieces to that puzzle that because I have thought independently, that I've put into place, and I hope to get to them and explain as many as I can, that I put into place, even though the puzzle is not done, that I put those pieces into place, and I know that puzzle is what it's going to show when I get it all together. In fact, it's already showing. It's just marvelous. It's jaw-dropping. And I give credit to my father for helping me to get started where I did, because I think I would have wasted a lot of time otherwise. And I've asked myself every step of the way, am I being foolishly consistent? Or is this a consistency based upon something that is true? Just as true as planting that seed in that ground the way he taught me, in a timely manner, so that it would sprout and accomplish what I call the measure of its creation. That seed was created for a purpose, and I helped it with my dad's instruction, with my father's instruction, to reach its purpose. Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to do with, I mentioned that probably the ones that would get the most out of this would be my children their children and grandchildren, grandchildren. I don't know I don't know how long this will be around, but I'm focused the same way as he was to help me be successful. And I want you to be successful. And I want you to at least hear what I have to say and think about what I have to say, so that you won't have to chase failure after failure until you get it right. There's joy in learning, and there's joy even from learning from failure. But I'm sure glad my dad taught me how to drill grain and where to get started with drilling life, and still allowed me the independence of thought to do it. You know, if you think about it, it's like the language thing I talked about with those boys. That didn't feel comfortable to me, and yet I adopted it, and I had to discard it, and it wasn't easy. Caused me some problems. I won't get into that, but it caused me some problems, and there's a course I could have taken that would have been different. And my dad understood that about life. And I knew that part of what he gained, that understanding, came from an application of scriptural truths that he had understood through experience and through thinking and observing and applying and failing. Yes, I know how failure works to our good, but at the same time, I know the despair that can come through not applying truth. Well, this is going to be a little longer video clip than some of them I've made. I guess I get a little carried away when I talk about some of these things, but it's just vitally important for me to do the same thing that my dad did. And he didn't necessarily put pieces together, and I haven't put a lot of puzzles together either. Real puzzles, life puzzles, maybe a lot of those, but puzzles on a table. But I put enough of them together to know that if you keep after it and you keep asking the right questions and searching and hunting and fitting and maybe refitting and finding the right piece, that when it goes into place, it's a peaceful feeling. And that's why I say, when you hear the Lord speak to you and you heed that, you obey it, the Lord is bound. And once you know the Lord is bound, there's a peaceful feeling that comes over you. I call it the fruit. You know, you can go through a lot of work and raise a tree and everything that goes into it. What you're after is the fruit. And yes, there's some shade and there's some other benefits. There's some birds in the trees. And that's all good along the way. But what you're really after is the fruit. And I'm going to talk to you about that as we get into all this. There's something on the inside me that just wants to dump it in like a dump truck. And yet I know that if I take that long, it won't be effective. And speaking of being effective, I'll just confess something. Every time before I do one of these, I pray to God, to my Heavenly Father, that my efforts will be not only accepted by Him, but they will be guided to Him, and that they will be for the benefit of anybody that listens to them. And they might, even though they're imperfectly put together by me, because I sometimes stutter and stammer and cough and whatever it takes, that even though they're done imperfectly by me, I pray that the Lord will touch the hearts and minds of those that might listen to them and think about them, and maybe do some research, because it doesn't come without some effort on everybody's part. I just pray every time that it will be a success in that respect. And I feel like I'm being guided. I told you before, I don't really come into these with a script or anything like that. My notes are brief and non-existent, and I just say what I think needs to be said, and I pray that the way I say things and what I say will go to the mind and the heart of those that are listening. Because I, just like my dad knew how to plant grain, after 75 years, I know some things. I don't know everything by any means. I don't want to convey that I have any way an understanding of the kind of knowledge that I even need. Sometimes to get through the next day, I take it day by day, and as I do, I listen, and it works. Sometimes it works after I've made a mistake and done something wrong. And even in those times, after you've done it wrong, it's that'll say, you messed up, it's okay. We'll catch you next round. You can do better. Keep trying. I'm going to end all of this tonight by just saying that, sometimes I finish these by saying that I love you. And at times, I feel like I'm talking to a specific person or an individual or one of my grandkids or great-grandkids, even maybe one of them that I don't know yet. And I get that feeling that what I say is going to make a difference. That there's going to be some good fruit come from all of this. And that's my prayer. I have confidence in it. I'm going to bind the Lord by doing what he says. Come back. Bye. Love you.